the left is basically what most people, this is what they know. Like, I mean, it depends on, if you're not really heavy into networking, you pretty much concentrate on what is on the left, right? You know that within a region, you can create a VPC will have a CIDR. That CIDR is going to be splitted, right, across multiple subnets, right? And those subnets are basically in an availability zone. And an availability zone is basically a data center, right? This is fine, honestly, for all the tests we've done, all the sandboxing we've done, everything. This is really good, like just in one level, right? But when you work on a larger scale, it's going to be hard for you to do. I've seen places where even in organizations where these things are managed manually. And sometimes it's not really easy for you to see at a glance what is like my IP addressing scope. Like, what's my IP addressing scope? Like, what IP addresses do I have? What IP addresses do I have free? What am I currently using? How do I just have a single rule that says, if you want to go to this region, you're allowed. If you want to go to this region, you're not allowed, right? Because these CIDRs, they're very important when you start making some very, very important networking decisions. And that is what I'm trying to show you today. Like, you have to think beyond just one VPC and think about more or less like a larger scope of things, right? Because really, if you want to think about like a large setup, this is not enough. You have to more or less like think about it like in a more or less like you have to think about it beyond a single scope, right? This is one VPC. But if we actually wanted to think about what are the planning that is going to happen at a higher level, what are we going to be doing? And that's what I'm going to be showing you today. The whole idea is that I'm sure some of you know. So if you want to create like CIDRs in AWS, this is really the ranges that are supported, right? A lot of people use 10.0.0/8, but you can also use 172.16. You can use 192.168. These are all ranges that you can use, right? But the whole idea is that if you zoom out a bit, one thing you will do is that when you want to plan a VPC, for example, like I said, VPC is the end state. Usually everything is going to lie inside a VPC, and in a VPC you have like AZs that have subnets that you're going to be deploying stuff to. But you don't just start throwing VPC CIDRs out there. Ideally, you're meant to do one level above that. You're meant to plan, right? You're meant to plan, and there are multiple ways you can plan. There are really multiple ways you can organize stuff, right? The first thing is for you to think about like, which regions am I going to be deploying my applications to, right? Here on the right, you can see I'm saying that I want to deploy my applications to US West 2. I want to also deploy to CA Central, US East 1. So it depends on you. So the first thing is, which region am I going to be supporting? Like, which region is my workloads going to be supported? You know your client. So, and everything I've said in this course, it differs from one setup to another setup. Like, maybe in some organizations, they're only in one region. Maybe in some organizations, they are spread across 5 regions. It just depends on how you've set up, right? So the first thing is you have to more or less like think about a pool. Okay, like if I think about everything we're going to be doing across the organization, we don't need more than this number of IP addresses, right? So here you can start with a pool and say, this is my pool of IP addresses. By the way, we're going to be talking about IPAM today, like so more or less like IP address management, how you can actually do IP address management in AWS, right? Not just focusing on the VPC side of things, but what happens before the VPC. Because when you're giving a VPC CIDR or like, do subnet allocation, that's like the end level. But before that, it is expected that some planning must have been, you should have done some planning before you now start, dishing out those VPC CIDRs, right? So in this case, we're thinking about, okay, like what's like a root pool? And we're saying, okay, we can use 10.0.0/8, which is like 1 million IP addresses, right? You're going to also see how in Cloud Map, that is easy to visualize. But if you also, I think you've seen me use some of these before, right? So the numbers that you're seeing, and basically you can actually just come here to say CIDR calculator and just bring it here, right? And you see that, okay, it has 16 million IP addresses, but this is not all the IP addresses. You can extend it if you want. Like you can use other CIDRs. Like we just talked about this first one. If you copy this one and you paste, what you're going to see is you still have like 1 million, that you can also attach to your organization, right? But let's say we start from there, all right? The next thing you can do is you can say, okay, I have 1 million. I want to break that because I know I have applications that I'm going to host in my US West 2 and my in these different regions. You can split it further and say, instead of 16 million, I want to have 4 million to US West 2. Again, this is an assumption, right? Usually, when I teach these things, I teach them from just how you should think. But again, it's usually the organization that will decide, like how do you have more of your workloads in a particular region, or it is uniform across regions, right? If you have more of your clients in one region, it means you may need to allocate more portion to a different region as opposed to another region. But here I'm just saying, out of 16 million, we can give 4 million to US West 2. We can give 4 million to CA Central, and then 4 million to US East 1. And then we reserve another 4 million because of expansion in the future. Because we feel as time goes on, we can expand. We might need more regions. We might want to expand our workloads to other regions, and we might need to attach more IP addresses, right? So once you leave a regional pool, so you've said region, but the good thing is that once I start discussing some of the, this is going to be helpful if I start teaching you some things like shared networking or things like transit gateway, how you can basically understand how to move traffic, how to block traffic from one, say, you cannot go here. It becomes easy at this point because you've already mapped out the IP addressing beforehand. And then it is easier for you to structure your networking decisions, right? I know sometimes as DevOps engineers, people don't really pay attention to this, but it's important because these are the things later that's going to drive how traffic actually moves within your application, right? So when you leave a regional pool, what is the next thing you're going to be doing? You can now say, okay, within a region, you can say, I'm not doing for all, okay? But if you watch this video and you want to practice, you can always go into the other regions and specify. But within a region, you can also take this 10.10 and then break it apart and say, in my US West region, I'm going to have like a prod segment that has 2 million IP addresses. And then I'm going to have like a non-prod that has 1 million addresses. Again, depends on your use case. And then I can also have like a shared, maybe a place where I can put like my shared networking. So when you talk about ingress, egress, when you talk about firewall, you can throw them in your shared networking, right? And then you can also have like a place for reserve. Like you want to expand in the future, you can have something like that within a particular region. When you leave there, what is the next thing? Inside of a prod, like a prod account, that's where you can now say, okay, if this is for prod, then what's next? Basically, now I want my workloads to start taking addresses from that pool, right? So the first one here is saying the client VPC, right? So US West 2 prod client VPC. It's going to take 65,000 IP addresses. The next one is going to take 65,000, like that. And you can see this dot that I have here is just showing that as more VPCs, you bring more VPCs online, they can begin to take IP addresses from this pool, right? And then we will now go further to just one VPC, right? Just one VPC level. What are we now going to be doing there? We're also going to be thinking about like, okay, what are the workloads that we want to support in the VPC? And then that's when we started to think about, there's going to be a private workload, which is now mirroring the things people see at the end, right? So it's mirroring, like you have to have a private, you have to have a public subnet in each availability zone, right? But planning is important because when you plan ahead, it helps you make some very critical networking decisions as time goes on, right? Depending on your clients, depending on the regions you are deploying your applications to. So within a particular VPC is now when you're saying a VPC supports 16/16, 65,000. How can I break that apart? Then you can say, okay, for my prod workload, private, because most things live in the private subnet, right? You can say, okay, all my privates is going to use /17, which means I have 32,000 IP addresses in there. IP addresses basically are the things you're going to be launching. So things like if you were using EKS, you saw how we used ECS, all the tasks that were coming up, all the containers, they needed their own IP address, right? So it depends again. Remember, these things are always dependent on the organization. So sometimes these numbers, you can reduce them. Sometimes you can increase them depending on what you want to support. But in there, you're going to have something like this. And then you can also have something like in a VPC, you want to have like a public, right? In some cases, you may not even need a public CIDRs in a given VPC because sometimes you have like a shared networking. Maybe you don't even need public subnets. Maybe you just only want private subnets. So networking decisions will always vary, but it's good sometimes for you to know the options that you have. And here, for example, you have like a prod client, prod client private endpoint. So this is like a sub. I think I was telling people the other time that people are used to public and private subnet, but that's not all. Sometimes you can have segments. Subnets are just a way for you to more or less like segment your workload, right? So you're saying anything that has to be public would stay in this segment or this subnet. Anything that has to be public will stay here. And maybe you have one again for like your private endpoints, all the endpoints that you create. Maybe this is where they're going to be getting all the IP addresses. These things, as time goes on, they help you to more or less like plan how you network, how you do your networking, especially if you want to make it easy. It's straightforward if you're just dealing with one account, but if you have multiple accounts, multiple regions, it becomes very cumbersome if you are not planning ahead, okay? And then you can have something here that says, I just want to reserve this space in case tomorrow in the future I want to expand, I can use this part, okay? So how do we How do we accomplish something like this? That we start from a planning, and then we move to like creating a VPC that uses something from the plan. And that's what we're going to be doing today. And I showed you, I said, so what I'm going to do is that after this class, the next class, we'll actually create a VPC, a complete VPC from the plan, right? We'll create a complete VPC from scratch from the plan. But today we are laying the foundation, right? And that's what I'm going to be showing you. So we're going to be using an IPAM, like IP address manager. Not in every organization you need this, but the knowledge here is very, very good. Just for you to understand that there are ways you can basically use to plan your IP addressing. Instead of you just applying IP addresses to site like VPCs, you can plan them way, way earlier. Understanding the footprint of your organization and how you're going to expand in the future is going to help you so that you don't have to start moving things around as time goes on. Okay. So the first thing we're just going to do, we'll create IPAM. I think here it says allow. Especially when you want to use AWS organization, this will be handy. Let me move my face a bit to this side. Maybe it's going to help. So what I'm just going to do is yes, allow. I'm not going to use free tier here. I'm going to use advanced tier, just so you know, because advanced tier is basically what will allow me to do some of the things that I'm going to be doing here. Okay. So here I'm just going to call the global name. I'll call it my IPAM. Okay. And then here I'll say my IPAM. Right. I mean, whatever name you want to call it. This is where you're not going to choose which regions do I want to support. And if we go, you remember I always start with a whiteboard, right? Just for you to understand, you create the problem, create it as a whiteboard, and then it's just very easy for you to start implementing. So we've seen here US West to CA Central 1, US East 1. Those are the regions we want to support. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is I'll say US West 2 is 1. What about CA Central? Let me see if that is part of it. It is part of it. So CA Central. And so I'll add that region, and then I'll add the US. I think it's EU. Sorry, EU. I think it's EUS 1. So Ireland, right? So we have 3 regions, right? I'm just going to create the IPAM, right? So we start from there. So at this point we are, and it comes with scopes. In this case, there's this scope, there is this scope, right? Usually you have like your private scope, you have your public scope. Everything that I've showed you here will be dealing mostly with the first scope that we have, but we don't have any pool, right? We don't really have any pool, and then that's where we are going to be deciding. Okay, in this pool that we want to deal with, right? Where do we start from? We have to create the root pool, right? It's all in the diagram. We've created the regions we want to support. So if you go to that IPAM, for example, and you click on it, you can actually see the regions that we want to support. So CA Central, EU West 1, US West 2, right? Good. The next thing we want to do is that let's start creating our pools. So how do we create a pool? We'll go to create pool, and then we'll follow the diagram. We'll say the root pool, right? So the root pool, we'll call it my root pool, right? So it's here, IPAM scope, plan within the scope. Here I'm not going to be using the locale, and the reason is just because we look at the diagram. This root is not scoped to any region. Okay, so I'm going to leave it that way. I'm just going to leave. It's not scoped to any region. This is where I declare my initial CIDR, right? So what I'm just going to do is go back to the diagram and basically come here and say, I want the entire pool to start with a /8, right? And the /8, you can already see immediately, it gives you the number of IP addresses that you see, 16 million, right? So if it kind of tallies with the number we have here, 60,777,216. Okay, so that's it. We'll say we're okay with that. We'll just create a pool. So we've created our first pool, right? Like I said, we're going to be following the diagram. Just exactly what is in the diagram is what we're going to be following. So we've created our first pool. We'll now move to the next level, right? We'll start creating our regional pools, right? So we created the first pool, and now we want to start dividing that, right? Because I always say that what you see at the end, which is this VPC that you see, sometimes it comes from a larger pool. And that's because some planning has gone beforehand for you to understand, like from an organizational perspective, how IP addresses should be done. And then you can, break those down. So we're just going to be creating the US West, the next pool. So we'll go here, we'll click on these pools. So if we refresh and we go to pools, there is one here. What we'll do is that inside of this root pool, we want to create a new pool. So create a pool within this one. We'll say this, we'll say pool for, I'm just going to call it for, say pool for US West 2. And then what I'm going to do is basically, I think all we need to do, remember, in this case, it's a regional pool. So we actually have to give it a region. So US West 2, this. And then the CIDR is where you can see it tells us we're taking it from the 10.8. So let me zoom in a bit. We're actually taking it from the 10.0.0.0/8, right? But it says 100% is available. So this is a good place for you to, I mean, there are other visual diagrams like these ones that exist, but honestly, inside of EPAM, you can basically do most of those things, right? So here, let's go back to our diagram. We said the CIDR we want for US West 2 should be, will impute, will say this. And it tells us that at this point, basically, it's like we're taking 25%, right? Which is exactly what we want. We're doing like 25, 25, 25, and then we're reserving 25% for the future, right? What that is fine. We can just create that pool, US West 2. We'll create it. The pool is being created. While that pool is being created, we're just going to, okay, so I should not close this page. So I'm going to wait for it to finish its thing, and then we'll start creating the other pools, okay? Remember the videos I usually upload. You can always watch them if you can't finish, if you can't wait till the end, okay? You can always catch the video. So we now have two pools. You can see if I scroll down inside the root pool, there is now like the US West 2 pool, right? But that's not all. We'll go here again. We'll create a new pool. This time we're going to go into the next region, which is CA Central. CA Central. Let me just go back to the pool. Sometimes you just have to verify and see. In this case, yeah, the locale is US West 2. Cool. That's just what I want to verify, just to make sure we're actually creating it within a region. We'll also create a new pool within this region. We'll call it this one. So this, we'll call it pool for this. And then we are going to go in here and say the locale is actually CA Central, because that's the regional pool we are creating. And then we'll call this a /64, okay? If we do impute CIDR, right? You impute CIDR, you can see the first 25% was already allocated. Now we've moved to the first. But again, this is the beauty, because you begin to see, is it overlapping? Is it a new allocation? Is it already allocated? It's a good way for you to see beforehand, right? Which is some of the visual element that is not there if you're actually not planning, okay? So here we've seen it's going to have 4 million IP addresses, which is exactly what we know. We'll create the pool. We'll create that pool. So /64, and then we'll create the third pool. The one that is reserved, we'll just leave it. We can always expand when the time comes. But we go here, we'll create a new pool, right? So we'll create a pool within this pool. And the next pool we're going to be creating is US East 1. So we're going to go here and create this one and say pool for US East 1. And then we're just going to do IP space within the pool. Here, we're going to give you the region, US East. Yeah, I wanted it to search for US East 1, but it's not. Maybe I clicked the wrong pool, probably. So I should be here. I should be creating within this one. And I should say this, and I should say pool for this. And here is where I want to actually call it the, it's not seeing that region. Why? Let me see. This is supposed to be US East, US East, EU West, US West. I think, okay, I actually meant this should be EU. I think it's EU East actually meant. So, yeah. Is it EU actually? Let me see. EU. Okay, let's just actually change this one to, it doesn't really matter. We can change this one to US, EU. What is the one that is available? I just want to split it around. So we can say this is supposed to be EU West /1. So we're doing that. And we're going to be making this just to have something on the European side of things. So we will have that. So it means we'll pick that card, this one, so island, this one. And then we are going to, so we can see this is already allocated, this is allocated. So we're going to pick that CIDR, the one we were dealing with, which is 10.128.10. So we'll do this, we'll impute a CIDR, fix that range. It gives us the next available block, and then we'll create the pool, right? Once we create this pool, I think for the other ones, remember that if you look at the diagram, we want to keep 4 million reserved, right? So 4 million IP addresses, we want to keep that reserved. In the future, we don't know. We may have need for us to support a different region. We'll just go in there, okay? We'll expand. So now within the region, what should be happening? We've seen that in the region, we have 4 million IP addresses that we support. Again, the organization will be different depending on your organization, depending on your use case, right? But within the region, what do we want to support? We want to support prod workloads. We want to support non-prod workloads. We want to support shared workloads. We also want to support like reserve, keeping a reserve for the future, also within the region. So we'll start creating this one. So this one, the first thing we're going to create is here. We'll say US West 2. So we'll go to pools, and then within US West 2, we'll create a new pool, and we'll say in this pool, we want to create this pool, which is US West 2, whatever your naming convention is, but yeah, I'm just calling it US West 2, just so that I know that that's the pool, but it's for prod, so pool for US West 2. In this case, it's IPAM, it's it's the IPAM pool, that's the source. It's IPv4, it's from the pool. It's already scoped to US West 2, as you can see. Right now, we have 10./10, that is 100%, which is where we want to start slashing from. I know I've used, I've used, pasting the CIDR, but you can also pick like you can also just pick a size. So here, instead of picking, copying the CIDR, I can just do /11, right? So here, I'm just going to do /11, so 11. And then I'm just going to do US West pool I'm going to create. So if you check it, you notice that it already told us we have like 2 million IP addresses, which is exactly what we're doing, right? We took US West 2 and we're breaking it apart. We're like prod, we want all the prod that is in there should have like 2 million IP addresses. But again, these things varies. It just depends on your use case. So, but there we've broken it down to like having 2 million IP addresses right now in that pool. So if we go back to the pool, you see that within US West 2, we already have US West 2 prod, right? And then what we can actually create, we'll continue, we'll create another one. The second one is a US West 2 non-prod. So we're going to create this, right? So we'll do this. And then what we're going to create here, we'll say this, we'll say pool for this. It's already scoped to US West 2, which is the most important thing. The CIDR block in this case is like /12, right? So we'll go there, we'll say /12. We'll do /12. And if you do /12, the beauty is you see the green pushes. It just tells you that new allocation. So you are not competing with something that has already been chosen. So this is already allocated. We've seen that already. So with that, we'll create the pool. I'm going to show you more things that we're going to do, and you're going to see how we use it. But let's just finish creating the pool. So we've created US West 2 non-prod. We're going to create US West 2 shared, which is /13. Oh, I think I'm actually doing, yeah, but let's actually see. The beauty of it is that because I'm creating /11 and /12, let's actually see what that pool looks like. So if we go back to the pools and we look at this one, if you look at the CIDR, right? So this is like US West 2 prod is doing 10 and 0000/11, right? So if you check it, this is correct. But in the second one, we actually did /12, right? Which we created. So when we did /11, can we go and check that pool? That's the beauty of like doing it the other way around. Did you notice how it actually was able to find the CIDR? We didn't have to specify it ourselves, right? We just said we wanted /12, and it knows exactly the next block to take the IP address from, right? That's the good thing about the management, because you can have it done for you automatically. You don't have to start doing manual CIDR planning. You can basically just have, just take one huge CIDR and then break it down into numbers, and then it just does all the planning for you. You can see here I did /12. I didn't really mention this 32, but it knows that the last block was already /11. The next logical block will be /10.32. Okay, so let's try it again so that you understand what I'm saying. If we go to the last one, which is US West 2 shared, right? What I was trying to say is that inside this pool, we can create a new pool inside the pool, and then we can do this, and we can then say pool for this one. Sorry, for this. What I'm actually trying to say is that it's in that pool. It's in this US West 2, which is fine. What I'm saying is that you can see this has been selected. This has already been selected. But now I need a new size from that pool, right? Instead of manually putting the CIDR myself, I can actually go back and say, I want a /13. So it knows exactly how to carve out a /13 for me, right? So I'll go here, and then I'm going to impute it. So I'm just going to create a pool. You can see it did 10.48. 0.0.0/13, right? So, which is exactly what we have here, right? So sometimes instead of even me writing the CIDR, I can actually just use this size basically. So /11/12/13, and then let IPAM do everything that it needs to do. Remember, we kept a reserve pool here. We're also keeping a reserve pool here. So we're done. So we've moved from regional pool. Now we want to go to the VPC pool, right? So the VPC pool. So the VPC pool is here. We are saying that this part, we want each IP VPCs that are created from US West 2 prod should actually all take it /16. That's what we're saying. But here I'm going to do some basic things. So in this case, and that's why you see there's more ... saying you can keep taking VPCs from here. I don't need to be manual about it. I can basically just say, if you need an IP address, just choose the pool, and then a pool is going to just give you an IP address. How do we do that? So if I go back to this pool that I created, US West 2 prod, what I can basically do is if I go here and I go to US West 2 prod, I can actually edit it. I think I missed it, but it was good. I didn't miss it. I just needed to get to a point where I explain what is happening. So here, I already have a pool, right? But you know that I have this pool at the top, but at the end of the day, I really want VPCs to start taking IP addresses from that pool. A pool is just how you define that, oh, I have this 2 million IP addresses, right? And then at the end of the day, you're setting that pool aside for allocations to happen, right? And this is where we decide, okay, let's play around the allocation rule. Let's say that the minimum you can take from this pool is a /16, right? So /16 is really, if you want to allocate a resource in this pool, it has to be a /16. And if you see, it follows our diagram, right? We know that everything here has to be /16, right? We'll say /16. We'll say the maximum you can't take above /16 also, right? Again, these things are always dependent on your use case. And we'll say the maximum, so that's the default. But again, we'll set this rule and say the maximum here is /16. And then we'll be saying that we also want to give like a tag compliancy. The point is that we also want to say that for you to actually allocate something from this pool, then you have to meet this requirement. So I'm just going to call it IPAM pool, but whatever your organization sets apart, you can. So what I'm going to do is I'll say for you, so that you know that you're not mistaken. You have to be sure that you're picking something from this pool. I'm saying you have to tell us the IPAM pool is US West 2 Pro, right? Cool. So once that is fine, remember we already had the pool here. We just added more allocation rule, so that it can happen automatically, right? So basically, it's just like saying these are the rules that has to be matched for something to be allocated inside here. So I'm going to save the changes. Okay. So what have we done so far? We've seen that we have these, we have these, we have these. There's still enough space. We still have like 524,000 IP addresses that can be used in the future if we want to, which is good. But here, let's now create a VPC. Like I said, today we're just going to do all the IPAM part of things because in the next class is where we are going to we will more or less like take the foundation that we have built and then build an entire VPC where we are not manually specifying subnets. We are not manually specifying CIDR blocks. We're basically taking from pools that already works for us, right? Cool. So the first VPC we want to create is, let's now create a VPC and say this VPC, we want to create it and we want it to use this pool, this one that is here. So what we will do is that we'll go to VPCs, right? We'll keep this other place handy. We'll go here and we'll try to create a VPC. You can do VPC and more, but here I'm just trying to create VPC only. And I will say, the first VPC I'm creating, just don't mind me, I'm just giving it this name, but you can give it whatever name you want to. But I'm just trying to mirror what I have on the diagram, right? Once we left the prod environment and we're creating our first VPC in prod, I'm just using that name to match what we have, like, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a VPC, I'm giving that. This is where you choose IP4 CIDR manual input, or you use like something that is allocated from IPAM, right? So I'm going to do here. The question is, what am I going to do? There are many pools here, right? So there's the US shared, non-prod, so many pools. What am I going to be doing? I'm going to be using the US West 2 prod, right? That's really the parent. So here, that's what I'm going to be doing. So what I'm going to do, I'll create a VPC with that. You can see it already says, maximum allowed 16. That's really the CIDR it supports, right? So I'm just going to use that, none. I'm just going to create that, and I'll create my VPC. I'll create a VPC here, all right? Okay, yeah. And if you remember, when we created, there was a rule we set that said that you cannot create a VPC unless you meet that rule, right? You can't allocate anything from that pool until you meet the IPAM, that distance. So we need to add a new tag and call it IPAM pool, and call it, the name we gave it was, I think we were using this, right? So before you can allocate, you need to actually have this tag specified, right? Just so that people not just allocate when they're not sure. So sometimes these are things you can also control at the IAC level, right? But this is we doing it from the console directly. So create the VPC, and yeah, the VPC has been created. And did you see how automatically it gave us an IP CIDR? We didn't have to specify one. We basically told the VPC in the point of creation that we have a pool that we want to work from. Just give us an IP address range from that pool, right? And now we have this IP address, this one, right? And so this is still similar to our diagram. So we're making progress. Right now, we now have like our first IP address. Our first VPC, it has an IP address of 10.0.0/16, 65,000. If I also take another IP address, it's going to give me from this pool. If I also go to another range, it's going to give me from here, and that's how it will continue, right? Sometimes you can have this. Sometimes, again, remember that this is really, again, just so you remember, this is broken down into like the client. I'm not really being specific about the client, but you can also take it a bit further. You can say, instead of like client just taking any block, I really want to set VPC for clients, like create blocks for for like your clients. In this case, we're just allocating clients from that pool, but you can also have like a range for each client to say this client belongs to this range. And what it means is that when you start making IP address, when you start doing like, when you're trying to make more or less like networking decisions, you can actually tell which side that belongs to a client. So it depends on how you want to set up, right? In this case, we're just saying, for now, take a client from that pool, and that's it. The question is, how do we now accomplish what is down here, right? Remember, we're still trying to mimic what the original VPC is going to look like, right? So there's a region, US West 2, it will have a VPC, and that VPC, you have AZs, availability zones, which in this case are data centers, and in there you have subnets, right? And we know that we said that we already have a VPC that took IP address in from the pool, and now within that pool, we are thinking about how do we now create these other workloads, right? These other ones that basically can more or less like take a form from that pool, right? Which is the next thing we're going to be doing. So what I'm going to do is that this is where sometimes some automation is required, right? Because what I'm trying to do right now, you can't just automatically do it. The reason is because this pool is not ready. Like, you can't define this pool if this wasn't ready. And we just created this one now. So what it means is that we need to create a pool that kind of represents this. And then we can also specify the rule for creating IP addresses within this workload segment. Okay, how do we go about it? So let's go to EPAM. We'll go to our pools. In this case, you can see, for example, if I refresh here, if I go to resources, you can basically, it gives you some very clear idea. You can see these ones are basically, this one says non-overlapping, but this is really not a VPC we care about because this one is not inside of the pool, right? But if I close this one and I go into the prod one, and I do, for example, you can see this where you can also see provision IP addresses. You have 2 million, 50% of the source pool, meaning from where the original source is taking 50% of it, right? And you can also see allocations. In this case, remember, we just created a VPC. So this VPC is already allocated to that pool, right? The next thing we want to do is that we have to go back to the pools. We have to go to that prod pool. And then we need to create a pool inside of this pool, right? So what we'll do is we'll create a pool within this pool. And what we're going to be doing here is that we're going to be calling it so we'll do an IPAM scope. Yes, correct. So we will give it a name first. Remember, we're trying to create now this, right? Like I said, this is something automation can do, right? So, but for now, let's just do it manually. So we'll do this, and then we'll do pool for this, okay? Once we do that, the scope is here, it's fine, this is fine. This is where you're now going to be telling it, instead of it do IP plan within the pool, right? That's what we've been doing. We can change it to say plan within the VPC, right? And here is going to show you all the VPCs that is available. Usually it takes more time. So we are going to give it time for that VPC to populate, okay? So let's just wait. We want to plan it within an IP address. Yeah, you can see it's now here, right? Sometimes it takes time, but this is really what we want to do. The CIDR is 10.0.0/16. We know that already. which is fine, right? So we're just going to create that pool. So I think everything is good at this point. So let me just scroll up. We've created that pool. We'll create it. Okay. So at this point, we are closer to more or less like a finished state. So we've left this pool, and then we've created this pool, right? No, sorry, we've created this pool now. This pool is what represents that client VPC, right? And now what we want to start doing is to start creating the workloads, right? The workloads subnet within that VPC, right? So what we can do is that we can go here, we check our pools again. You can see that within this pool, the prod, there is now a different pool, which is this one, right? So pool for this was the one we created. We'll click on it, and then we'll say here, create a pool within this pool, right? So when we create a pool within this pool, what do we want to call it? This is where we start creating our actual workload. So we'll do this one. We'll just do this. We'll go here. Let me just close tabs to the right. So what we're going to do is we'll paste this. We'll say pool for this, right? And then what we're going to do is that we'll keep IPAM pool. That's what we want. And what we're going to do is that this is where we'll choose what is the CIDR, right? Remember, we're starting from 10/0/16. What we actually want is we want to break it. We want to take /17 from it, right? So we started, this is 10.0.0/16. We want to take 10.0.0/17 from it. So we'll just say we want a size. I hope you know how to do this already by now. That's going to give you 32,000 IP addresses, which is exactly what we mentioned here, right? We need 32 IP addresses to represent our private workload, right? Good. So that is looking like what we want. Here, I'm just going to configure a rule that says when you take from this block, you can't take above 19 or minimum. The default allocation I want from this subnet group is /19. So everything should be uniform. If you're picking something from the private subnet, you can only get /19. Okay, so we have to bake in that rule. So what we're going to be doing here is that say /19. So that means every subnet in the private workload is going to have /19. It may work for your use case. It also depends on your use case. It depends on your use case. /19, you can see it's 8,000 IP addresses. If you want more, that means you have to play around that diagram or play around like how you plan stuff, right? In this case, we can go with the /19, right? We can say the default, the max is going to be that /19. So we will go to this. We'll also go and say /19 is here, and this one. And then we'll say tag. We want the IPAM pool to have that name, the name we actually want, right? There are other many conditions you can use. There's a way you can say, okay, if the region is this, if the VPC name is this, and it's for private, just know that this is the pool they want. Like you want them to meet this condition, right? So we have this condition set. It should give us, itself should be /17, right? Which will give us 32,000. But inside of it, only give us IP address spaces of /19. Okay, that's what we're saying, and that mirrors our diagram. We're saying /17 should be that private subnet that has 32,000 IP addresses, and then within that, I should be able to allocate subnets that are /19, right, and go that route. Okay, so I'll do that, and I'll create this create this pool. So that pool is being created. So I'm going to wait. It's been created. And the next thing we want to do, you can go all the way down, but because for this, whatever we're going to be working on will be private and public. We're not really working with but I think I've explained severally that when people hear subnets, like when you hear subnets in AWS, it's not just public and private. Subnets, it's a way to more or less like gather things together. It's just a way to group things together. So it depends on, sometimes you see like a ingress subnet, you have like a transit gateway subnet, you have like an egress subnet. It just depends. So don't be, if you're in your journey with AWS, don't be used to just knowing that it's public or private. There's more. Like here, I even said there's a subnet for endpoints if you want it. Okay, but for this class, I'm just going to focus on the private and the public side. So we've done public. Let's also do we've done private. Let's do public. Okay. So what we're going to do is, again, we're going to go back to the pools. We'll go to the pools. Remember, we already have inside of prod, we have private, and then we're going to go inside of prod again and create the one for public, right? So we'll do public. We'll say pool for public, And then in there is where we say we want a space of what now? We know what the size should look like. The size is /19, right? So it's not a must you copy the entire CIDR. You can just do /19. Because it knows, it has already allocated the first part for the private workloads, right? So if we do input size of /19, it already knows. It's just going to give us this green part, right? So it means these other parts that are left is going to be for the endpoint and then the reserved space that we have. Like, cool. So once we have that, we can also configure some rules to say the subnet max, maybe for public subnets, we don't really need, we don't need a lot, right? Because public subnets, sometimes people discover, sometimes I've seen a lot of settings where you don't even need public subnets. You don't need things to be in the public subnet. But in this case, we can have public subnet, but maybe we don't need a lot. Maybe /24 is fine for us, okay? So what we're going to be saying is we're going to create a rule and say the size is /24, for example. So just means that, yeah, we want to be conservative here. /24 just means we just need 256 IP addresses for that public range within that VPC. So 24, we're going to do /24. And then we're also going to say tag, we're going to say IPAM pool. The name should actually match this block, right? So the block is this one, the name of the VPC base, or like the name of the VPC then with the public workload attached to it. So we have that, we'll create a pool. At this point, honestly, I think we've gone through the pooling. Again, the whole idea is that most of us are used to like going to a VPC and just creating a CIDR, but usually in large settings, large organizations, when you're dealing with multiple VPCs, multiple accounts, so many clients, so many environments, sometimes there's a lot of planning that goes ahead of that. And I'm just like introducing you to that kind of planning, because these things helps when you start doing shared networking, when you start doing transit gateway, when you start doing VPC peering. These things are very, very important because it also helps you avoid the issue of overlapping CIDR IP addresses. So instead of you doing it manually, why not use IPAM to basically start that, right? So once we have that, once we have this already created for us, we created this. Remember, we still have this space and this space, but we can let it be for now because we don't need all that too. But I'm just showing you as an example. It could be other subnets that you want to create. So now we have those pools. What do you think we should do next? So let's go back to our VPC. We know that in our VPC, we basically want, let's now go to what most people are used to, right? We've already created a VPC that has these, right? 10/0, but we didn't create it manually. It basically took something from the pool. The question is, how do we now start creating the subnets such that we don't need to specify anything? They are smart enough to get IP addresses from the pool. Basically, give me the next block that is available. But the beauty of it is that at every level, they have groupings. This already segregates private, this segregates public, things that are already in the public space, right? Cool. So what we can basically now do is that we can then go to VPC, for example. So we'll go to VPC, we'll go here, and we'll go to VPC, and then we'll go to VPCs, for example. We have this VPC already, right? So we'll go to subnet. This is where let's play with our first subnet now. So let's create our first subnet. So we're going to create our first subnet. We'll call it, this is the VPC we chose. So what we can do is we can say private subnet, and then we'll call it, because this is where you have to be specific. So here I'm using US West 2A. So what I'm just going to name this US West -2A, okay? Just to be specific that it's for US West 2A. This is where I choose if I want it manual input, which is what most people do, but I can actually say I want it, the subnet itself should be allocated from a pool, right? So here, because for that VPC, I'm just going to choose this US West 2 prod client. You remember we had the VPC pool itself, and there's also the private workload because we are creating a private subnet. So I'm just going to use the private workload pool. You can already see it says default is /19. I can try to play with it, but it's not going to work because that is like what I've defined. And it goes alongside my diagram. My diagram says all the subnets there should be /19. So if I go back to here, I know I need one more thing to add, and I need to add the pool. We gave it like a condition that says for you to actually claim that pool, you have to give us this name, right? So let me see if I can copy this name. I think the name we said is this one. So we have to use this name. That's what it says. Just so you know, if I try to create it, like if I remove this tag and I try to create it, it's not going to work. So I'm going to go back and retry it again. But this time I'm going to give it the pool name. So IPAM pool, and then give it a name, and then try to create it, right? So create. So now we have our first subnet. The question is, what is our first subnet? Our first subnet is /19. And you have how many IP addresses available? It's here, 8,187, which follows. So you can see that it's not magic. We've already planned it ahead of time, right? We already know before time what that is going to look like. The question is that now I don't even need to bother myself. If I want to create the 3 private subnets, right? All the 3 private subnets. So we've created private subnet 1. We'll create the second private subnet 2, which is like in a different AZ, and AZ is a data center, and then we'll create the third one. So let's just create for the privates, okay? So we're going to go here, and we will create, so we've already created this one. So the next thing we want to do is create another subnet in that same VPC, and then we're just going to call it, here we'll say US West 2B. Sometimes just naming your VPCs can help. We'll do this, and then we're going to say, yeah, we're in the wrong, so we have to create the right one, so it's still private. Remember, we're still creating private inside that same AZ, right? That data center. And then this is where we're using the default 19. And then we need to provide an IPAM pool name, right? That matches the value that we have down here. So it's this one. So we're just going to copy that name. So we'll create the 3 IPs. So we'll do this, and then we'll create the subnet, right? So it created. So what is our subnet looking like? If I remove this and I just pick the VPC that I'm working with, so it's this one. How many VPCs do I have now? So I have like, sorry, I need to move this down. You can see my subnets, I don't even need to keep IP addressing. You can see the first one started from 10.0.0.19. The second one is smart enough to start from 10.0/32/19. They know already. But the good thing is, these I can already group them. I can group them from the source, because I know from the source they will all have like, /17. That's really what groups them together. And that's a good way to start grouping stuff. So you can know all my IP addresses that are in a different region. You can know like the groupings for all your IP addresses in a different region. So just looking at an IP address, because you already have this plan in place, you can tell which region it comes from, or which region, or is it a prod VPC, or it's not a prod? Because I know right now all my prod is 10.0, right? All my non-prod is 10.32. All my shared is 10.48. So just looking at an IP address, you can tell which environment that IP address represents. You can also tell which region, because I know that all my regions, US West 2 is 10.0, CA Central is 10.64, EU West 1 is 10.128, and so on and so forth. So it really helps you organize. It helps you plan, right? So let's create the last subnet. So the last subnet we want to create, we've already done. So again, you just have to make sure this one is, did I even select this? I think I didn't do this properly. Did I actually choose the right subnet? This is supposed to be, yeah, I think I did this wrongly. Okay, so we need to correct this. This is supposed to be, I'll delete this subnet. So I need to, because I think I still chose US West 2A, right? But that's not what we want to do by design. We want this to be 2B, because the name is 2B, but the subnet is showing 2A, right? Which is wrong. So let's delete it. So I'm going to do delete, and then we'll create it again. Sorry for that. But yeah, sometimes you have to be sure of, so we have to delete this one and click delete here, and then delete it. We'll release that pool, and then we'll try to create it again. So we'll go here, the VPC, we'll give it a name. I think I didn't change the preference, right? So if you didn't choose the preference, it's just going to throw you to 2A, but I want it to be 2B. And then I'm going to choose that, is here. So it's private, and it's 19, which is fine. I just need the IPAM pool to be equal to the name that we've been using, so which is this one. So it's this name. We'll copy this one, and then we'll paste it here. What do we do? So we'll paste it here, and then we'll create a subnet, right? So it's going to create. So we have 2 private. So far we have 2 private subnets, and let's create the third one. So if I close this, and I choose the VPC that we are talking about, which is this one, what you notice is that 2A is matching to 2A, and 2B is matching to 2B, right? But you can see this one was moved to /64. Does it really matter? We don't really care, because, just give us something within that pool. And that's the whole idea. You don't really need to, be specific to be like, it has to be this block, right? You don't really care. Rather, a grouping is enough for you, like just to know like the groups of the private subnets. Okay. And the next thing we need to do is we want to go back and create the last subnet. So in this case, we'll do this VPC. We'll choose, I think we'll just use this one down to say, I think let's create this tag first. IPAM pool is this. And then what's the name of the VPC now? So let's look at this, subnets. We've created 2A and 2B, and then we need to create 2C. So we'll copy this. We'll take it back here and it is 2C. Always don't forget to choose the right availability zone that matches it. Remember, this is what throws it into a particular data center. And the data center is basically what we call AZ in this case, right? It's going to be EPAM allocated, and the EPAM that we want is private. And then the name is this. This pool is there. The net mask is 19. We already know. We'll create a subnet. And that's it. We're done. So at this point, we've actually created all the private subnets, right? If you go back to the diagram, which is going to be the full class when you come around next time, it's really how do we now create this VPC? Using the structure we've already created, right? So we'll now create the 3 private subnets, the 3 public subnets. We'll start connecting in that gateway, put the network ACL, put whatever we need to put. But I think I've done this at some point as a design. So we'll continue from there last time. Again, like you're aware, if you click on the link on my bio, you can basically find the videos. Here, there's no source code. I'm basically doing it in the console. But if you want the source code, the video, you can always catch it when the recording is out. So just make sure you don't miss the live stream when I'm live, or just make sure you catch the video and watch it, okay? But again, like I've always said, watching the video is not enough. You need to practice. So be in the habit of practicing or trying things out. Okay, that's how you get better. So we're good. We didn't really talk about the public because yes, we won't be able to build the complete VPC today. We won't be able to. It's gonna take time. So let's just say today we spend time looking at what happens before a VPC is created. So right now we know that what we already have works. If we need a new VPC, we claim the VPC claim. We'll claim the pool that defines the VPC in prod. Remember, we just went through one block, right? We went through the prod. We went through all these ones. But ideally, you can also do the same. You can replicate the same for clients and go through the non-prod side. But the good thing is that it's very good that we know that if we see this one, we know it's prod. If we create something under this part 10.32, we know that it's non-prod, right? Which is good for us. For the subnets, we already have 3 subnets that have been created. So if I was to select that VPC, we currently have 3 private subnets, right? They all have like 8,187 IP addresses, which is really what we want, what we are looking for, right? So these things are not things that you need to manually handle. Sometimes there are tools there that can make it easy for you, okay? So I'm not going to go beyond this point. I'm going to leave it as is. So we've created a foundational block for us to pretty much now, for the first time, I've done it before, but we didn't really go through the entire VPC. So what we're going to do in the next class is really take this and then build a VPC really from the pools that we've created. So we'll basically continue to build our complete VPC, create a public subnet, the private subnet, all using IP addresses from the pool. And the good thing is that what it means is that you can now go to your IP address manager, and then you can see things like, you can pick a scope if you want to, like the private scope. You can now begin to see, right? So the things we're creating there, they are showing up here. So it's easy for you to come here and say, I'm looking for something that has this, it's just basically easy for you to find stuff. You can see that in prod, we have this, and then we have the subnets, and you can basically see the IP addresses, right? So 10.19, 10.64, 10.96, right? Which is good because now you have people keep Excel sheet for these things, right? So you create an Excel sheet, you're managing this manually, but if you have a lot of accounts, a lot of VPCs, this becomes very cumbersome to manage. And that's why AWS is always a tool in AWS that can help you get things done. And we just explored one of it. So this is a good layer. You can pretty much plan. This is like a planning layer. And when you start doing with multi-accounts, multiple organizations or multiple VPCs, there's nowhere planning is done. You have to plan. There's no way you can just start allocating CIDRs here and there. You have to plan things ahead of time. Like how many IP addresses are we going to support? What's our IP usage? What's our IP consumption? This is pretty much talking about AWS itself. But sometimes you can also even think about if you were bringing your own IP address, or if you have like an on-premise environment, and you needed them to connect with your AWS environment. There's more you can basically do, but this sets a good foundation. Okay. So I'm going to stop here.